Shona, Elliott, thank you so much for being here and talking to me. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
You know, everybody's talking these days about people-centered leadership. Some people are saying, what is that? Can you tell me what it even is?
Yeah, for me, people-centered leadership is about being in service to your employees and to people and connecting with their humanness. And in my experience as being a senior leader for over 15 years, I know how easy it is to get disconnected from being people-centric or employee-centric. We get too lost in our goals and objectives set from the board or revenue generation, and we forget that our employees are the ones that are helping us every day achieve those goals. So when we really do focus in on our employees, on the people themselves, then we realize kind of what they're experiencing and how we can help support them achieve those goals together.
What does it mean to focus in on your employees? What does that mean for a leader?
Yes, so for me, every leader is different. And what was really impactful for me throughout my career was really walking in their shoes. So I really was purposeful from my early days as a leader to always find a way to have a shift with them. I would either clean hospital rooms with our environmental services workers or deliver food trays, answer IT tickets, watch C-sections or joint replacements, or work in the emergency room along with the physicians and nurses. And when I did a full shift with them, I could see the reality of their working conditions. I could see the impact of the decisions I made, sometimes good, sometimes not so good. And I really learned what it meant to be an authentic leader by listening and listening to their perspectives. Sometimes they were not easy perspectives to hear, and it was through that listening, I really began to connect with employees and build the trust. And it really taught me what I was a leader for. And I was a leader there to be in service to them and to support them as best as I could.
You were a CEO at a hospital at that time?
Yeah, I've got 15 years of experience, VP to CEO, and my last role was as CEO of a technology supply chain organization and support to hospitals.
When you do what you just described, actually going through a shift with various employees, seeing what they do, experiencing it firsthand, is the main value there that you come to understand them better, or is the main value that they come to feel appreciated there better because you took the time to do the shift?
I think it's all of the above. When you show up, when you do those types of interactions or shifts, it really is to understand what they're doing, your employees, and to honor that and to build that trust and to listen to them and really express to them the value of what it is they're doing that connects with the mission of an organization. And as you're walking in their shoes, you can't help but acknowledge the great work that they're doing. And they're doing it every day, all day. And you just walk away inspired. And when you show up that way, they see that from you and they themselves appreciate that. And then they feel honored and respected as well.
And it's been proven in study after study that that does more to increase productivity than just giving someone a monetary raise.
Yeah, absolutely. When I did the research for my book, I hadn't really appreciated the depth of research to that end. So I knew that through my experience. And when I was in the thick of senior leadership, I didn't have the time to actually do the research myself or read it. And in preparation for the book, the research is all there. So it kind of amazed me that it's there. And we kind of all know that as senior leaders, that that's what we should be doing. And yet just get lost sometimes in terms of the busyness of the senior leadership position. And my hope and my messages to those leaders out there is to understand the work for them to do is that work by connecting and spending the time understanding your employees' experience.
Well, if you're coming from the old paradigm, which is we just got to make it happen, we got to make the revenue, got to do what the board says we need, got to make it happen,
Yeah.
sometimes that causes a kind of psychological and emotional blockage, a difficulty in being vulnerable, which turns out to be the exact skill that you need in order to change into this new paradigm of what leadership is. Isn't that correct?
For sure. I've been there myself many, many times. So even after years of studying leadership, being a leader, walking in the shoes of my employees, yet there would be months of that I get caught up in the busyness of whatever was going on in terms of goals that needed to be achieved and, whatever crisis was there at the moment. And even then, I would still forget that that was the key to why I was being a leader. And I would lose my way a little bit. I would feel less joy. And then I remember, gosh, I hadn't connected with my employees in the way I like to do in months. And I'd go back down, schedule a shift. And sure enough, I would reconnect with my purpose, reconnect with the amazing work employees were doing, come away inspired, show them my humanness by being vulnerable. When you have to actually clean toilets along with environmental services worker, you're new in the role and you are in a different position and you're vulnerable when you're doing that. And that enriches the connection and increases the authenticity in terms of that connection with employees.
And it doesn't make people want to work less for you. It makes people want to work harder. It motivates people to want to be part of this mission that all of us are excited about. How does the people-centered issue apply to your work with customers and with clients, not just the employees, but the customers and the clients? Where does that come in?
I typically work with clients in a combination of ways. So I don't just coach them for an hour, kind of teach them the principles and then send them on their way. I really navigate with them the issues of the day. And as I navigate those issues with them, I'm teaching them how to really connect with employees in every interaction that they have. When we're working on cultural renewal and being a people centric organization, how senior leaders interact with every communication that they do, verbal, written. It's all so important to building culture. And a lot of senior leaders don't understand that. So I work with them as a trusted partner and help them navigate through incidents, help them look at their policies, look at their leadership team, their organizational structure, and all of their kind of people benefits as well, and their strategy, and to look at that through the lens of employees first. And then most importantly, really feeding in employee feedback to shape all of that. So we connect with employees together.
When I was a child, there was a saying that the customer is always right. And it seems to me that our society has evolved to the customer is always wrong. Instead of feeling like a valued customer, the phrase is you're our valued customer. More and more over the last few years, people have felt like devalued customers. So we need to sort of change back to what used to be a more traditional model, don't you think?
For sure. And I see that on the employee side. So when I work with senior leaders, often in the beginning, they'll discount what they're hearing back from their employees, either an employee survey or in meetings or anonymous kind of complaints, depending on their systems they have in place. And I'll hear a lot of excuses or a lot of dismissing of what the perspectives are for employees. And I always have to put a frame around that for the senior leaders. So this is what's true for them at the moment they provided the feedback. And so you need to honor that. There is something there. And if you're not understanding that, their feedback or the perspective, let's find a way to seek to understand so that you can come to a common place together versus just discounting it. And so I see a lot of senior leaders in the beginning not take a lot of action on employee feedback. They just discount it and move on with their own, assumptions or own perspectives. And that's a lost opportunity for them. So that takes some coaching and some reshifting of mindset along the way. And once you start to acknowledge that regardless of how an opinion is shared with you from an employee, it could be in a heated moment, it could be in a very terse or unfriendly email. And if you look beyond that emotion and you see the heart of what's at that communication and try to understand how that employee was feeling at the time, you don't become as defensive and nor do you discount it so quickly. And you're open to really understanding what may need to be shifted to create a better culture for the organization.
Well, this whole journey is a shift in mindset. It's a transformation to a people-centered model. I also think that every time somebody shares an opinion, you could figure out how many people probably would share that opinion as well. And what you appreciates when somebody feels that the company cared or the leader cared what they had to share, even if the leader ultimately in his or her own heart is not going to to change their behavior because of it. The person likes to feel that they were heard. Everybody likes to feel heard. And that of itself would make me want to come back into a store if I felt that I was heard and somebody cared what I had to say. Also, I have seen in my own work that, let's say I'll see somebody write something negative or critical online. And sometimes people say, oh, Marianne, you just need to ignore all that. Well, certainly there are the haters, and you can sort of tell that.
Yeah.
But then there's another group of people who, like you said, whether they expressed it eloquently or not, probably had something you needed to hear. At least that's what I have found. People are smart.
100%. I have had many experiences in my career where we have had to make some significant changes of service in healthcare and communities. And the belief was not to hold community kind of town halls or forums because you didn't want to have to face the anger, or you're making changes with respect to employee structures and services. So you don't want to face the employees and share the news with them. And my belief and my experience is when you do get into the thick of it and you have that dialogue with them, regardless of how heated they may be, there is such value in letting them share their feelings with you and for you to hear it and to process it through seeking to understand and not judging their emotion and not judging feedback. You come away changed just by going through that interaction, and so does the employee or the customer. I encourage it, and I understand how uncomfortable it is. I have been uncomfortable more times than I can count, and I've always felt incredible after having gone through those experiences, because I know healing has occurred for all of us just by having those hard conversations.
Well, that goes back into the vulnerability that we have to be willing to cultivate in order to be a leader. A vulnerability that was exactly what we tried to cut ourselves off from with the old paradigm of what it means to be a leader. As we have moved from a top-down paradigm of I'm the boss and I'm just telling you and you just got to do it. That's so old, so obsolete, into a new world where we're just holding the space for the brilliance of others. We invite the brilliance of others when they feel their brilliance is appreciated. And I can't say I only appreciate what you have to say if it's to tell me how wonderful I am. It also has to be, I appreciate what you have to say, even when it's not such wonderful feedback.
Well, it's a gift, and we naturally want to avoid those tough conversations. And I would like to believe that the hierarchical command and control style of leadership is archaic. And yet I'm working with many organizations right now where that is kind of the leadership motto in place. And it needs to shift, and it is a mindset shift to do that. And it comes from a place of vulnerability and being comfortable with the uncomfortable conversations and not running and hiding from it. So when we look at communication challenges in organizations today, it stems from leaders not wanting to have those conversations that are needed with employees because they're fearful. I get it. I've been there and I understand it. And it's working through the fear and understanding why you're a leader in the first place. And if you kind of home back to your purpose, and for me, that purpose was to be in service to employees, then you realize you have to step through that fear, make it not about yourself, yourself being right or wrong, but it's being there to honor the employee, their feelings, their perspectives, and working through that together and not running from it. And I think when leaders can understand that they're safe to do that, and that's a shift, then they can really move forward with being vulnerable and hearing and listening in an authentic way that really does repair the relationship and build that trust that's so needed for employee engagement.
Well, also, no company, no organization can keep up with the times and remain relevant and remain significant that is not going through its own regenerative process, its own coming up with new ideas, being of the moment. And that's simply not going to happen. If your relationships with people are stuck, then the organization is going to be stuck. You can tell when an organization is stagnant, and it always can be go back to something stagnant in the personal dynamics between the leader and employees, and also the leader and the customers. I want to ask you a question. We recently heard about a famous CEO who died tragically in a house fire. And the more stories came up about him, the more we saw that he was part of a very disturbing pattern that we've read a lot of. People who seem to have it all. People who had started multi-million, sometimes even multi-billion-dollar companies, organizations. They stood in front of millions of people and talked about how to do it, and they seemed to have the golden life. And yet more and more we've seen how statistically, how often more of those people, they suffered more from things like drug addiction, alcohol addiction, and so forth. What's going on there? What do you think has been the problem with the entire model of that kind of enormous success that has led people down a path of too often of an unbalanced life?
No, it's interesting you bring that up. As senior leaders, often we don't take care of ourselves. That self-care kind of model, we don't invest in it. We work super hard and long hours. We're always kind of on the clock, so to speak. We don't get to disconnect. And sometimes we lead from a place of ego in terms of success as well. And when we don't invest in self-care through proper sleep and meditation and reflection and mindfulness, it is so easy to become consumed and then find ways to self-medicate the stress. And we don't talk about that. We see a lot of top performers in the world invest in coaches for fitness, for their mindset, and for just optimal performance. So we think that's okay. Yes, of course, a top golfer will have 3 or 4 coaches, but yet CEOs are reluctant to really invest in those coaches when it is so critical for them. And if they don't do that, then the success, the hours, the stress catches up, and leaders don't feel comfortable sharing their weaknesses and vulnerabilities. They have to know it all, and they have to be the visible face of the organization. So they can't cry out for help until often it's too late.
And often I think also the leader, the person sitting on top of the organization, knows that there are markers they have to hit. And if they don't
Yes.
hit that marker, somebody else will be hired to replace them. And that can lead, among other things, to just workaholism. You are busy so many hours of the day. The husband, the wife, the children don't get the energy, don't get the bandwidth, don't get the time that they demand. What's the way out of that trap?
Well, depending on the organizational structure, it starts with the board. So, in my experience, unfortunately, having worked through many toxic cultures in my experience in my career, the board sets those goals, and they set those goals without really an understanding of the impact to the senior leadership team, to the CEO, and then certainly to the organization, which it does trickle down. And so, the CEO is just on plan to achieve those goals from the board. And those are tough conversations as a CEO to have with your board. They're your boss. So you're not going to say to them, hey, like I'm working 80, 90 hours a week and I am just dying. So is my leadership team. And it's really having an impact in the organization. So for boards, the more that they can balance out their goals in a holistic way. So it is not just about the revenue targets. Yes, those are important. It is really taking a look at the balanced approach to the people in the organization, including the CEO. And it's starting to have those conversations at the board that, it's okay to be able to say, hey, this is really stretching me and stretching my organization. So we need to really rethink these goals and either expand the timeline or something else has to drop. And that is a challenge for me and for most senior leaders, is to begin to have those conversations. And if you're the CEO and there's no board, you're just sometimes stuck in the adrenaline and the achievement of the goals. And like you can get addicted to that in itself. And it's building in that reflection and mindfulness and understanding that every decision you make as a CEO, you are driving your organization down this kind of path. You're just barreling them down. And so you as a leader need to be really reflective of how your addiction to the next success impacts your organization.
Well, I think as the consciousness and the culture changes, the conversation changes. People like yourself talking about it, writing about it. You go from the old paradigm of a board hiring a CEO and how it seems so great that the CEO is basically willing to give up his or her whole life to lead
Yes.
this thing, to everybody recognizing that is unhealthy.
And it's
And
not sustainable for
yeah,
sure.
and unsustainable for people and for organization. And that people, beginnings are important. that people can an interview for the job by saying at the beginning, I want to take this company to its highest. I want maximal productivity. I want maximal success. And I don't want to sacrifice my marriage for it. And I don't want to sacrifice my kids for it. And I hope that you support me in that. And we need a new kind of board consciousness. And it's happening where boards that 10 years ago or 15 years ago might say he or she is indicating they don't want to work hard enough. Today's board, the conscious, the enlightened board would say, I like that person for standing up for what they need. That means they'll be more likely to stand up for what their employees need. And that's what this company needs.
100%. And the doing that is not mutually exclusive with achieving those revenue targets the board sets or you want to set for yourself. It all works in tandem. And so without that piece,
Exactly. When you have a CEO who's producing, but running on adrenaline, running on cigarettes, running on alcohol, running on drugs, running on all of the dysfunctions that we all know too well from that kind of lifestyle, the organization will suffer and no one will win.
For sure. You'll have a quick win for a year or two, and then you see what happens.
Sugar high, and then it'll all crash. Well, Shona, Elliott, it's clear talking to you why, number one, these kinds of ideas are so important to the culture. It's so obvious why this kind of coaching is necessary and needed, both for boards and for CEOs and for anybody trying to up level the performance of their organization. And it's also very obvious why you're someone that people look to do it. So thank you so much. I so appreciate the conversation.
Oh, so do I, Marianne. Thank you so much.
Thank you.